Okay, we're going to begin factoring, and this lesson is not in the book. This is one that I've created a worksheet for, and we are going to be looking at GCF, a term you should be familiar with, greatest common factor, and then we're going to look at a factoring method called grouping. So first of all, let's address some things on your calculator. GCF is not on your calculator, however, there is something equivalent to it. There's one under your math button. If you go to the right, under number, go down to number 9, there's one that's called GCD. And what GCD stands for is greatest common divisor. It means the same thing as factor. Factor we think of as what you multiply, divisor is what you divide, but it's still the same concept. So this will help you in terms of finding the greatest common factor when you're talking about numbers. The limitations, again, it will not do variables, and also it will only do 2 numbers at a time. So, for instance, if we took the numbers here in problem number 1, we used the GCD button on the calculator, parenthesis 30, and then comma, which is next to the parenthesis 10, then press enter, and it would give us 10. 10 being the biggest number that will divide into 30 and 10. So that's how the button works on the calculator. Now, that being said, we want to try to do things by using our basic arithmetic skills. So, common factor, I'm going to do a couple of examples here. Again, we just looked at this one. Basically, all GCF is doing distributive property backwards. So, for example, again, what will go into 30 and 10? 10 will. You look at the variables, it has to be a variable that's in common. Well, the second term, 10, doesn't have a variable, so you can't take any variables out. So you put your parenthesis, and now you do reverse distributive. You ask yourself, 10 times what would give you 30? And that would be 3. You didn't take any variables out, so there's still x to the 4th. Then you ask yourself 10 times what would give you 10? That would be 1, and that's a positive. Now, what happens when you do have variables? Okay, so in this problem number 3, we're going to address 2 things. First of all, always pay attention to the sign at the beginning. If the sign is negative, then that means you're going to take out a negative factor. Again, we look at our numbers, 10 and 2. What will go into both of those? 2 will. So we're going to take out a negative 2. Then we look at our variables. They both have ends. However, this one only has 2. So 2 is the most we can take out. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think of it in expanded form, so I'm going to write this over here to the right. N to the third is n times n times n. N to the second is n times n. So what do they have in common? They have this n in common and this n in common. But they don't have any more because this one doesn't have any more n's. So the most n's they have in common here are 2. So we take out n to the second. Now we do reverse distributive. We ask ourselves again, negative 2 times what gives me negative 10? That would be 5. I started with what? N to the third right here. So if I take 2 of them out, how many n's does that leave? Well, that only leaves 1 n. Again, ask yourself, negative 2 times what, right here, will give you a negative 2, and that would be positive 1. I had n to the second here. I took both n's out, so there are no n's left here, and that's a factor. So that's how GCF works. Now we're going to tie that into grouping. So with grouping, you first have to determine when do you use grouping. Well, you use grouping when you have 4 or more terms. So if we look up here at this example, problem number number 16, we have 4 terms. When you group, always try to group in twos. So I'm going to group the first 2, then I'm going to group the second 2. Now, in essence, what we're doing is we're creating 2 GCF problems. So I'm going to ignore this one right here and just focus on this first group and ask myself again, what is the biggest thing that will go into 7 and 42? 7. Again, always paying attention to the sign here. Both of these have x's. What are the most x's I can take out? 2 x's. So what does that leave? So now we do the reverse distributive again. 7 times what is 7? That would be 1. I had x to the second. I took 2 of them out, so what's that leave? That leaves just x. 7 times what is negative 42? That would be a negative 6. And then I had 2 x's, and I've taken both of them out. Now we continue with the same process in the second group. Again, always paying attention to that lead sign. So I'm taking out something. Well, in this case, the biggest thing that'll go into both of these is 1. Sometimes that's your GCF. So I take out a negative 1, do reverse distributive. Negative 1 times x gives me x. Negative 1 times negative 6 gives me 6. So now if you notice, our 2 parenthesis groups are exactly the same. Plus, this overall group here should look familiar back to Module 20 when we were doing our zeros. When we said anytime you have a group here that's the same, you're going to take that group out and then take what you have left and put it in a group. 7x squared minus 1. Now that has been completely factored. So I'm going to come down here to number 22 and do one more example with you here. So problem 22 here, again, first thing we're going to do is group them. So first 2, second 2. In the first group, again, look, 25 and 10. What will go into both of those? 5 is the biggest thing. Again, always pay attention to your sign here. Look at your variables, v to the third, v to the second. So the most v's I can take out are 2. That's going to leave 5v minus 2. So just, again, ask yourself, 5 times 5 is 25. V to the second, I need that left 1v here because I had 3. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. I took both the v's out. Second group, that's a negative. What will go into 40 and 16? Biggest thing would be 8. No variables here because this is the only one that had a variable. Reverse distributive, negative 8 times 5 gives me negative 40, plus the v is still there. Negative 8 times negative 2 gives me 16. Again, what should happen? These 2 groups should be the same. So we're going to get rid of those and put it over here. And then I'm going to take what I took out and group it together, which would be 5v squared minus 8. So that is how grouping works. Again, these are the basic principles of factoring, and then we're going to go from here and start looking at the factoring methods listed in the book. So for this particular video, you'll have a handout very similar to this one, which we will do in class as notes, all the problems. But you'll have a homework assignment very similar to this as a worksheet to do.